And gentlemen, girls and boys, and assembled company, wherever you are in this big wide world. I rather like that hat, Keith. Thank you very much. And I see we've got Donald up by you next to the lock. Donald.
Yeah, loch woman.
Yes.
Laddie.
And Valentina in Canada. Lucy, where are you?
I am in London, London, England.
In London, and Baba C is absent at this moment. His background is there though, and his background I know is in Washington DC. Mike's up near the Welsh border on the English side. I'm sitting in Reading, and of course Waleed is inside the magic the magic lamp there. Oh, he's popped out a magic lamp in Marrakesh. So fantastic. Welcome to World Storytelling Round, and it is chaired as always by the amazing, not cantankerous.
Are you calling me cantankerous? Who's calling me cantankerous? What's the matter with you?
I don't know what you're talking about, Mike. Right.
You shut up. Get on with it.
Fabulous. Like rust, over to you, Mike.
Just bugger off somewhere else. It's lovely to be here again. I'm sat here. The clocks have changed here in the UK, so we're on Greenwich Mean Time again. So it's dark outside. The winter's coming in, but the colours are beautiful here. And the news I have for you tonight, so we will be here in 2 weeks' time, Lucy in particular, but I won't be here in 2 weeks' time. Well, I'll be here like I'm on your screen, but physically I'm going to be in Marrakesh. So I'm going to sit in the storytelling centre, because I've never been there before, with Waleed, and I'm going to have my hat, and I'm going to be, Camille's going to be there, and John's going to be there, I think, aren't you, John? And I'm going to run this. Now, I think I've been doing this for nearly 2.5 years, something like that. We did it through the pandemic and everything else. So I'm off to Marrakesh. I'm going to get on a little airplane and off we're going to go. I just hope that there's no strikes or there's no World Cup football gets in the way and all the other bits and pieces. But that's the news. So we're going to kick off tonight.
Waleed said he'll come and carry you if there's strikes.
I'm looking forward to meeting Waleed, and he and I we can either have a cup of tea together, or we can go for a beer, or whatever it is that he does. I'll buy him cake and beer. He's been so nice to me looking after all this. I'm looking forward to meeting you, Waleed. I really am, and I hope Camille will be there. And you just had a drink of something. What were you drinking now? Was that water?
Yes.
Yes, I'll buy you a bottle of water, but I've got a bottle of beer here. I don't suppose you drink beer, but never mind. We'll find something. Okay. Right, so I'm going to start off with Lucy from London. And then we're going to go Diana from Scotland, Keith from Lincolnshire, Donald from Scotland, and we'll take it from there, but Baba will be the one after that. Okay, so Lucy, if you carry on for us, please. Thank you very much.
The performer. I was born in Planet Theatre because the main job was performing arts. There were other many jobs too, and I was a farmer, but they were not as popular as the arts. There were so many actors and actresses performing stories. I saw an actor once playing the leading role in a Gothic series that took my breath away. He was so absorbed in his role that I believed every single word he said and every gesture as if it was true. He wore 4 rings. One was red, the other was wings, the other said C, and the other S. And I wondered what they could mean. I decided to research my favorite live actor, and it yielded a few surprises.
On World Storytelling Cafe.
In my research of my favorite actor. He would say things like, I don't know what other actors and actresses believe in. I can only talk about myself.
World.
Reality? What is reality? My reality is being a character in a story because it makes me happy. Those words stuck in my brain. My reality is being a character in a story. There had been rumors about him that he had been around longer than any other actor, always young. And I decided to check performing arts journals and found out that he had lived for over 200 years, as if he never aged. And I wondered, is he a vampire in disguise? I needed to find the answer to this question, so in my small car, I decided to follow him after one of his theater performances. It was 12 o'clock in the morning and dark. His chauffeur drove him home, and we entered an isolated area for rich people with mansions and swimming pools. Then he arrived home, and he entered. I was expecting to hear someone scream because he, the vampire actor, wanted human blood, but nothing. Then it was 4 o'clock in the morning, and I saw 3 women ringing his bell. He let them in, and I was wondering, maybe those women are vampires too, in disguise, or maybe just normal people. Then it was 10 o'clock in the morning, and the women were still inside his house. So I decided to go back home to my farm because I didn't have any evidence of anything. I was back home, and I was thinking, he lives in luxury, while I live here in this farm, looking after animals and cleaning after them. What a life. I needed to have a shower and have some breakfast. So I went to my bedroom, only to find the actor there waiting for me, sitting in my armchair. I screamed, and he said, "Why are you screaming? I know you have been following me." And I said, "Last time I checked, you were 200 years old. I think you are a vampire." And he said, "That doesn't make me a vampire. I could be an alien or someone from another dimension. I could be an angel or a demon. Anything really." And I said, "So what are you then?" And he said, "Immortal, half angel, half demon. I can be bad, I can be good." Then I realized what the rings meant. Red was for demon, wings was for angel, C for character, and S for story. You might say that we became friends. He had never been in a farm before, and in his free time, he will help me look after the animals, milking the cows, collecting the eggs, cleaning my house. It was as if he had entered my life story as a character, and it made him happy. But then he did warn me that he could be bad. He set my farm on fire, and he said I was getting tired of the animals, of cleaning after them. But don't worry, I will give you another farm, and you will start afresh. He did give me another farm, but I never saw him again. It seems that he being a character in my life story was not that interesting for him anymore. Thank you.
Wow, Lucy. Wonderful. Thank you for starting so well for us. That was great. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you
so
very much.
we're going to go to the Highlands of Scotland, where my friend Stanley Robinson said all the women are beautiful. If they were born in the Highlands, they were all beautiful. He said that every time I met him, and he thoroughly believed it. And I have no reason at all, in any reason today, to doubt him for any moment.
Okay, great introduction. Right, okay, my story is, well, I'll let you make up your own mind. It's all about a king, King Herbert, who lived rather a long time ago. Now, King Herbert had been such a wonderful king and always looked out for all the people in his kingdom. He was very, very popular, and people always remembered him kindly. And he was wise, and he was very knowledgeable as well. Well, he got older, as happens to us all. In fact, he got very old. And in the process, he changed. Well, people didn't really acknowledge the change. They wanted to remember him as he was before. But the way that he changed was he did more outrageous things. Instead of just going for a walk with the dogs, he would put the leads on the dogs and tie the leads around his legs and walk down the street like that. And of course, it raised quite a number of eyebrows, and it wasn't what you expected a king to do. But nevertheless, the people still loved their king, and they very much accepted him. Well, he would do outrageous things, like he would tie a rope round his middle, and the rest of the rope would go on top of the cathedral, and he would sort of walk in air round about the cathedral as he swung back and forth. And then he would throw dictionaries down at people. I mean, what a ridiculous thing to do. But he didn't worry about that. Not at all. So anyway, he stayed in the castle with his daughter, Bonito. And it just so happened that Bonito had fallen in love with the prince from the next kingdom. And the prince from the next kingdom's father was King Rupert. And it was arranged that King Rupert was going to come and meet King Herbert. And what then? They would find out just how silly he was. And that would be dreadful, a lot of people thought. Well, the advisors to the king, they decided that they would offer 1,000 gold coins to anyone that could come up with a reasonable suggestion or a reasonable solution to the king's silliness. And they all came pouring in, all these literate people, all these people with letters after their name and medical degrees, they all came rushing forward. And the very first one said what King Herbert needed to do to be less silly was to wear this potion on his head. But well, King Herbert didn't think about that, did he? He drank the potion. And then he felt really quite ill. So another doctor came along and he had some powder and he told King Herbert to dissolve it in the water and he would feel better. But no, King Herbert set light to it with a match and then he burnt off all his eyebrows. So another doctor said, right, we'll put some cream on your eyebrows to make them grow back. But well, he didn't do that either. He put it on his teeth and all his teeth turned green overnight. It really was no use. I mean, what was going to work with someone like this? But Bonito, she had an idea. And up until now, the advisors had all ignored her because after all, what did she know? She wasn't a literate person particularly. She hadn't gone and studied medicine or anything like that. So they didn't rate her opinion too highly. But she said, well, if I could take this egg and turn it into a golden egg, would you listen to me then? And they thought about it, did these wise advisors. And they said, well, yes, of course we would. Of course we would. And she said, well, I can no more turn this egg into a golden egg than you can. But even if I could, I wouldn't be able to help my father in that way, would I? And they had to agree that she had a point. And there was no one else with any bright suggestions. So they agreed that Bonito would have her way as to what she did when King Rupert came to visit. Well, everything was planned, and there was going to be a great feast. Everyone was beautifully decorated. And of course, what was King Herbert doing? Dangling from the chandeliers with a string of sausages, shouting sausages, and then doing handstands on the hall with a box of kippers on his feet. And of course, well, they were used to him. But King Rupert, maybe he would say that Bonito couldn't marry King Rupert's son. Anyway, what happened after that was that the grand day came, and in came King Rupert on his beautiful white stallion with his beautiful gold crown and long flowing cloak. And as he came into the kingdom, there were a great fanfare of trumpets, and there were a great many other soldiers on horseback as well. And it was all very grand and all very special. And the Chancellor and the Prime Minister rushed forward to greet King Rupert. But then shortly after that, there was this lady with a cloak on, and she ran up to King Rupert and she said something to him that not everyone could hear. She said there were 50,000 soldiers in his kingdom. And before King Rupert could blink, one of his own men stood up and confirmed this. In fact, he said there were near 1 million. Well, he couldn't believe it. In fact, he got such a shock, he fell off his horse and he fainted. And Bonito and his son had to take him into the castle. And of course, there's King Herbert doing all the things that King Herbert does best at this point in his life, like rushing around after the dogs and then getting the leads on and getting ready to go out and things like that. Well, after King Rupert woke, Bonito went up and so did his son. And Bonito said to him, how are you? And he says, well, I'm fine, except I have no home to go to now. I've heard about these 50,000 soldiers, maybe even 1 million soldiers. And okay, she said, well, of course you can stay in the castle, but you won't mind my father if he's a bit silly. And King Rupert said, oh no, we won't mind your father if he's a bit silly. Everyone is silly now and again. And she said, yes. Do you know, when I came up to you, when you came into the kingdom, I came over and I approached you, but you didn't realize who I was. It was me, Bonito. So we had a little chuckle about that. And then he discovered that the other person that had spoken out was actually his son. And he had a wee bit of a chuckle about that. And then Bonito said, what was most surprising is that you didn't even think how you were going to defeat these 50,000 soldiers. He says, well, I just couldn't do that. I don't have a big enough army. There's no way I could defeat all these soldiers. What do you mean? She says, well, did you ever think of trying to find out what kind of soldiers they were? And he said, well, he was just surprised. His mouth was open. And she said, they were 50,000 soldier ants. And all you had to do was pour boiling water on them and they would go away. So after that, he started to laugh. And he started to laugh. And he kept on going. And he kept on going. And he thought this was so funny. But after that, there was no problem with Bonito and his son getting married. And of course, it's all very interesting if you have somebody like King Herbert in the family as well. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Dan. That's lovely. Absolutely.
Terry
wonderful.
Jones. Terry Jones from Monty Python.
Right, Keith.
Well, thanks, Diana. Yes, you told a story about a king, and I've got a story about a king and a queen.
Okay.
Well, the king and the queen were very happily married, and he ruled the kingdom with authority. But sadly, they had no children. no heirs to the throne. And the Queen was very concerned about this, and she went for a walk in the wood one day, and she was very upset because they had no children. And she met an old lady who said, "What's the matter with you then?" She said, "Well, I have no children, and I'm afraid the king might do away with me and take a young bride, so he might have some heirs." "No children, eh? We can do something about that." And out of her pocket, she took 2 seeds. "This is what you must do. Tonight, you have a bath, and you pour the water under your bed, and you plant the 2 seeds. And in the morning, there'll be 2 flowers, a red one and a white one. Don't eat the red one, eat the white one." And so she thought this was strange, but she thought this would do. And she took the seeds and she went back that night to the castle, and she had a bath, and she poured the water under her bed, and she planted the 2 seeds. And next morning, indeed, there were 2 flowers that grew from the seeds, a red one and a white one. And she reached out her hand, almost a hand all on its own, sort of took the red flower and she ate it. Oh, I wasn't supposed to do that, was I? And she said, "Oh, well, it won't matter. I'll take and eat the white flower anyway." So as time went on, she found that she was going to have a baby, and she went to the king and said, "Your Majesty, good news. We're going to have a child." And so the time came for her to have the child, and she was in her bedroom with a midwife, and she gave birth. But the first thing that was born was a tiny black snake. And the midwife thought, "What's this?" And she threw it out the window. And then after that, there was a beautiful baby boy that was born. So as time went on, the baby grew into a fine prince, a very handsome young man. And it came the time when he was to be married and had to go to a foreign kingdom to go and collect his bride. And so he set off through the forest, galloping along to this other kingdom to find his bride. And then out from the woods came a big black snake. "I am the firstborn. A bride for me before a bride for you." And the young prince, he thought, "What's this?" And he rushed back and he galloped back on his horse back to the palace and went to see his father and said, Dad, there was a big black snake that said he was the firstborn." And the king said, "Oh, it must be a trick. It must be something. Go off and try again." And so this time the prince, he set off on his horse through the woods by a different track this time. Halfway through the woods, out from the woods sprang this big black snake. "I am the firstborn. A bride for me before a bride for you." "Oh," said the prince. And he rushed back on his horse and back to the palace and went to see his father. He said, "The same thing happened again, Dad. Same thing happened again. This big black snake saying that he was the firstborn." "We'll have to go and see your mother," said the king. And so they went to see the Queen. And the Queen said, "Well, you are the only one that I know that was born to me. It's only you. Go and try it again." And so the young prince, off to claim his bride, went galloping through the forest, and then suddenly this big black snake sprang out in the path and said, "I am the firstborn. A bride for me before a bride for you." "Oh, no," said the prince. And he galloped back into the palace. They went to see the king and the Queen. And they told them what had happened. There's this big black snake saying it was the firstborn. "Ah," said the Queen, "we'll have to go and ask the midwife." And so they brought the midwife into the court and asked the midwife. The midwife said, well, there was a little black snake that was actually thorn before the prince, but I just threw it out the window. Oh, said the king. And so they sent messengers out into the forest, and they brought back the big black snake, who was the firstborn to the king and the queen. And they put him in a bedroom, nice and secure. But then they sent out messengers throughout the land for a girl to come forward to marry the king's firstborn. And a maiden came forward and she said, I will marry the prince. And so the king and the queen, they took this young maiden to the door of the snake's bedroom. And the snake opened the door, and the girl gasped in astonishment, but the snake just reached out and grabbed her and shut the door and was seen no more. The king and the queen went back to the bedroom the next morning, and sure enough, there's just a big black snake. Well, again, they sent out a proclamation that some girl might come forward and marry the firstborn of the king and the queen. Another girl came forward, and they took her to the bedroom, and the snake opened the door, and the girl grasped, and the snake grabbed the girl, brought her into the bedroom, and next morning, of course, there was no young girl there, just a big black snake. And this went on. There was 12 girls that came, wanted to marry the king and the queen's firstborn, and each one of them were not seen the next morning. But then there was a young girl from another kingdom that came walking through the woods. And she came face to face with this old lady. What are you doing? Where are you going? She said. Well, I'm going to go and marry the firstborn of the king and the queen. Do you realise that it's a snake and he devours all the maidens that come to marry him? Well, I think it might be all right, said the maiden. Said, well, I've got something. You're a nice girl. I've got something to help you. And this is what you're to do. When you go into the palace, you are to ask the king and the queen for enough material to make 7 wedding dresses. And then you're to put each wedding dress on top of one another. And you're also to ask for a bucket of warm soapy water and 3 scrubbing brushes. And this is what you must do. And so she went to the palace, and she said that she had come to marry the king and the queen's firstborn. But she asked for enough material and the time to make 7 wedding dresses and put them on one on top of the other. And she also asked for a bucket of warm soapy water and 3 scrubbing brushes. And the king and the queen, they took the maiden to the door of the big black snake, and they opened the door. And the maiden's young girl, she didn't scream or didn't gasp or anything. She just walked in, and the snake was sat on the bed, and she was there. And the snake said, "Take off your dress." "I will take off my dress if you take off one of your skins," she said. All right. And he struggled and took off one of his skins, and she took off her wedding dress. And then he saw that she had another dress underneath. "Take off your dress," he said. "I will take off my dress if you take off your skin." All right. And he struggled and took off another skin, and she took off a dress, and there's another dress underneath. "Take off your dress," he said. "I will take off my dress if you take off her skin." And this went on until the maiden was down to her last dress. "Take off your dress," he said. And she said, "Well, I'll take off my dress if you take off your skin." And he struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled. And it was his last skin. And all that was left was just a lump of blubber. And the young girl, she went over with her bucket of soapy water, and she took a scrubbing brush and she scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed at the blubber till she wore the scrubbing brush out. Then she took another one and she scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed until she wore out the second scrubbing brush. And she scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed till she wore out the third scrubbing brush. And there before her was a very handsome black-haired prince, a very handsome young man. And the next morning, when the king and the queen went to the door of the snake's bedroom, they opened the door, and there, sitting on the bed, was a very handsome black-haired man and the young girl smiling at one another.
Oh, thanks, Keith. That was lovely. Well told, well told. Right. We're going to Donald. Where are you, Donald? Donald Alexandra. Where are you? What have you been up to?
Yeah, well, I've been quite busy, keep myself busy, helping out with a local charity. We have an old paddle steamer. It's an old ship on Loch Lomond, where it's been pulled ashore just now, and we're trying to restore it. So I've been spending time getting my hands dirty. But I'm just thinking, Diana, you mentioned Terry Jones, and one of the greatest days of my life was in the first I Write Book Festival in Glasgow in 2005. Terry Jones was one of the authors, and my job there, I worked for Glasgow Libraries at the time. My job there was to interview Terry Jones on stage in the Mitchell Theatre in front of a couple of hundred people. And I have never been so nervous in my life. And I've even walked through the streets of Glasgow. That's how nervous I was. But it was a fantastic day. It was so nice. And my 16-year-old son was with me. And he had his book of Monty Python scripts to be signed. And after the gig, we couldn't get him a lift back to his hotel. So I got to walk through the streets of Glasgow with him, down the famous Sauchiehall Street, with people all pointing, going, "That's great day." One of the best days of my life. He was such a lovely man. Anyway, on to my story. And I don't know anywhere else in Britain, but round about the bottom of Loch Lomond lately, it has been raining, and it's been raining lots. And if it's raining lots in Scotland, it's raining an awful lot, and the wind's been blowing, and the nights have been terrible. And it was on one of these nights that old Neil had to make his way home, and he'd been to the pub, and he's been having a few drams, a few whiskies with his friends, and he kind of overstayed. He overstayed how long he was supposed to stay, and he missed the last bus back to his own village, and he decided, well, I'm going to have to walk it. And he looked out the door, and it was raining and raining and raining, and decided, oh, well, we'll just have another dram and hope the rain goes off. But he knew the rain wasn't going to go off, but he wanted another dram anyway, so he had another. And he looked out the door and he thought, nah, I'm going to have to walk it. Maybe I can hitch a lift. So he started to walk, and the rain was beating down on him, and the wind was howling. And oh, it was cold, wet, shivering, and he was looking behind him all the time, and he was looking for a car, and there was no cars there. And oh, he was shivering, cold, and he said, oh, please, God, just send a car to pick me up. And he kept walking and looking behind him, and he was walking against the wind, and the rain was blowing into his face. The wind was howling, freezing cold. Oh, please, God, please, if you send a car to pick me up, I'll never drink again. I'll never drink whiskey again. I know it's drinking whiskey that kept me back, and I've missed my lift. And oh, please just send a car. But nothing was coming. And he walked for a bit more, and then he said, "Oh, please, God, if you send a car to give me a lift, I'll never ever drink again, and I'll go to church every Sunday. I'll go twice. I'll go in the morning service, and I'll go to the afternoon service. Please, just send a car for me." And no car came, and he walked and walked, and then when he turned round, he saw something in the distance coming along the road. As it got closer, he noticed it was a car, but there was no noise except the crunching of the wheels on the road, and there was no lights shining from the car. The headlamps were dark. And he thought, well, here's a car, and a lift's a lift. And he was standing on a bend in the road, and as the car slowed to go round the bend, old Neil opened the back door and jumped in, and he said, "Oh, thank you, driver, thank you very much for the..." And he looked, and there was nobody driving the car. The car was moving along on its own. Oh, maybe it's one of these new sort of driverless cars. Maybe, I don't know. And they went along the road very slowly, and they came to another bend in the road, and the road was on the coastal path. And on one side, there was a hill, and on the other side, there was a cliff, a drop down into the sea. And as the car approached the bend, it went towards the cliff. But then a hand came in the open window, a cold, white, long-fingered hand, and grabbed onto the steering wheel and moved it just enough to keep it on the road. Then the hand disappeared, and the car kept going. "Oh no," said Neil, I don't like this at all." And as he went along, they came to another bend in the road, and again the car was approaching the cliff, and the hand once again came in the open window. Cold, white, long-fingered hand grabbed the steering wheel and pushed the wheel round just enough to keep it on the road. And old Neil said, "I really, really don't like this. This is, oh, what have I got myself into here?" And they came to a third bend in the road, and as the car slowed to go round that bend, old Neil thought, "Oh, this is my chance," and he jumped out. He jumped out of the car and he started to run. And he was an old man, and he'd had a few drams in him, but when you're that scared, you can run. And he ran, and he ran, and he ran, and he saw the lights of his own village. And he ran into the village, and he noticed the tavern, the local tavern's still open, and he said, "God, I promised you I would never drink again, but you did give me a lift as I asked, but that lift has frightened me. That lift must have been the devil's car." And he ran into the tavern, and he said to the barman, "Quick, give me a large one." And the barman put a large whiskey in the bar, and he drank it. "Give me another one." And he drank it, and he said, "Give me another one." And he's about to take his sip. The door burst open, and there stood a man, tall and thin, wearing a long black coat, dripping wet, and a big hat pulled down over his face. And he looked at old Neil, and he said, "You," and a long bony finger extended from the sleeve of his dripping wet black coat. You're the dirty rat that jumped into our car when we were trying to push it up the road." The end.
Yes. That's well told, Donald. Well
Thank
told,
you.
well told, well told.
Thank you.
And I hope Baba hasn't heard it before, because he's going to be telling it now for a long time if he hasn't. I think so.
Yeah, well, we do tend to steal bad stories, bad jokes from each other. Terrible punchlines.
Donald, you just made me hungry. That's what happens when I hear an extraordinarily told story. That was
Yeah.
funny, my friend.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bob.
Right, so we're going to go to Baba now, and then Valentina afterwards. Despina, you seem to be in the dark. Are you telling a story tonight, or are you just listening?
It's up to you, really. Whatever you
Oh, I've got
want.
plenty of time. Yeah, you can if you want to, after Valentina, okay?
All right. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Nice to see you again. Right, Baba.
All right. Well, I'm in a bit of a quandary. I had a story all picked out, knew exactly how I was going to do it, knew the voices I was going to use. The story was inspired by a story by James Weldon Johnson. Now, James Weldon Johnson was a large part of the Harlem Renaissance between 1910 and 1930, or some people say 1910 to 1940. Along with James Weldon Johnson, there was Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, Countee Cullen, Louis Armstrong, the Cotton Club, that's a story unto itself, Paul Robeson, Josephine Baker, AKA La Baker, Aaron Douglas, Marcus Garvey. Oh, there were lots of actors, orators, authors, poets. In fact, back during the Renaissance, people, much like people go to spoken word gatherings today and pay, they would do that for poetry back in the day. But he's also known for writing what we often call the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. He was also the executive secretary for the NAACP. I mean, the man was prolific. And he wrote a poem called The Creation. And I was going to do something derived from that poem, but now I kind of feel compelled to do his poem with some Baba C artistic license. So this is called, but restrained. Be restrained. This is called The Creation. And it's kind of, I found it very interesting. And maybe the next time around, I'll tell my version. And God stepped out on space, and he looked around and said, I'm lonely. I will make me a world. And as far as the eyes of God could see, darkness covered everything, blacker than 100 midnights down in a cypress swamp. And if you've ever been in a cypress swamp, that's pretty dark. Then God smiled and the light broke. And the darkness rolled up on one side and the light stood shining on the other. And God said, that's good. Then God reached out and took the light in his hands, and God rolled the light around in his hands until he made the sun. And he set the sun ablaze in the heavens. And the light that was left from making the sun, God gathered up into a shining ball and flung it against the darkness, spangling the night with the moon and the stars. Then down between the darkness and the light, he hurled the world, and God said, that's good. Then God himself stepped down, and the sun was in his right hand, and the moon was on his left, and the stars were clustered about his head, and the earth was under his feet, and God walked. And where God walked, where he trod, his footsteps hollowed the valleys out and bulged the mountains up. Then he stopped, and he looked, and saw that the earth was hot and barren. So God stepped over to the edge of the world, and he spat out the 7 seas. I was going to spit 7 times, but that's too much spit. He spat out the 7 seas. He batted his eyes, and the lightning flashed. He clapped his hands, and the thunder rolled. And the waters above the earth came down. The cooling waters came down. Then the green grass sprouted, and the little red flowers blossomed, and the pine tree pointed its fingers toward the sky, and the oak spread out his arms. The lakes cuddled around in the hollows of the ground, and the rivers ran down to the sea, and God smiled again, and the rainbow appeared around his shoulders. Then God raised his arm, and he waved his hands over the seas and over the land. He said, bring forth, bring forth, bring forth. And quicker than God could drop his hand, fishes and fowls and beasts and birds swam the rivers and the seas, roamed the forests and the woods, and split the air with their wings. And God said, that's good. Then God walked around, and God looked around, and all that he had made, he looked at his sun, and then he looked at his moon, and he reached out to his little stars, and he looked around his world with all the living things, and God said, I'm still lonely. Then God sat down on the side of a hill where he could think and think and think. By a deep, wide river, he sat there with his hands on his with his head in his hands, and God thought and thought till he thought, I'll make me a man. Up from the bed of the river, God scooped the clay, and by the banks of the river, he kneeled him down. And there the great God Almighty, who lit the sun and fixed it in the sky, who flung the stars to the most far corners of the night, who rounded the earth in the middle of his hands, this great God, like a mammy bending over her baby, kneeled down in the dust, toiling over a lump of clay till he shaped it in his own image. And then he blew the breath of life. And man became a living soul. And God said, this is good. Amen. Amen. Let the congregation say, amen. So that's a little different for me, but I hope you enjoy it.
No, I thought that was wonderful, Baba. I really did. Thank you very much. That's great. I've heard a couple of those over the years, and they're very powerful.
Right. I encourage you guys to look up the Harlem Renaissance, especially James Weldon Johnson, excuse me, and La Baker, because we have a La Baker connection to the festival. Right. Because she lived, the Riad where I stayed was the house where she lived when she was in Marrakesh.
All right, okay, but I know a lot from Harlem. They're called the Harlem Globetrotters.
Oh yes, yeah, but you know what? The Harlem, I know that, but I think that was a joke. But the Harlem Globetrotters were so good they were not allowed to play in any league. That's how good they were. To this day, they do league-related things, and but they're so good that no one wants to play against them.
Well, it's the strangest game of netball I've ever seen in my life.
Yes.
You don't seem to play cricket at all over there, like, you know.
No, just Pinocchio. Did I say that? Yes. In fact, someone said I must have been a preacher in another life. I have a lot of friends in different religions, and a lot of the ministers and preachers tell me that I'm a minister. And my ministry is telling stories, and that's the way I encourage and save souls. That's what they say. So yes, and I come from a family of ministers as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. But as storytellers, we're not preachers. You can be more than just a preacher by being a storyteller. Right. But we are sometimes, and we can be very good preachers if we so want to.
Well, if you're going to preach, preach well, and don't preach at, preach with.
Yeah, or preach for.
Yes, that's the word I was looking for. You took it right out of my mouth. Stay out of my mouth. Anyhow, I hope you guys enjoyed.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bob. It was lovely. Right, so we're going to Canada, Ontario. The Valentina and we haven't seen you for a couple of weeks. I hope you're well.
Thank you. Yes, I am. And my God, Baba, you're a hard act to follow. And I think some of the best ministry in the whole world is through telling stories and communicating. And that's what I do a lot about my disability, because Well, I don't mean to sound like I'm patting myself on the back, but one does get a bit tired of people saying, you're so inspirational, you're so inspirational. But what happens is what happens. And, we're given things to deal with in life. And there are many times that fact is stranger than fiction. And this is one of those kind of stories. And, the only thing that you can do is find your sense of humor and keep on going. And in the end, the universe or God fixes it in his own way. And this is such a story. I call it Blind Date. So it was Halloween, and I was a teenager. And my friends all had a date to go to the dance, and I didn't. And I was really upset about it. Here we go again. I'm the person that's out. It's harder for someone to, be normal, quote unquote, when you've got this disability. And I was feeling sorry for myself. Anyway, my friends went to the dance and they came home. And of course, Sunday morning, all they could talk about was this wonderful time they had at the dance and how they ran into these young men and they had a good time and whatever. But the other thing that happened is that my friends, my girlfriends, wanted to see these young men again. So they said to the boys that they found at the dance, like, what are you doing tomorrow afternoon? Maybe we could go out for, drive in the car or whatever. And one of the young men said, well, I only get the car if there's an errand to do. My parents really don't give me the car just for fooling around. So my friends got together and they said, well, if we can drive you back to your boarding school, maybe his mother will lend you the car. Fine. So I said, well, you can always ask. So my friends asked, and the young man's parents said, no, we're not using the car. I guess it would be a nice thing for you to do to drive this blind girl back to her boarding school, and, good luck and have a good time. So I met these young men and, my friends, and we had a fun time driving back to school. Of course, we, drove other places first, but we did end up getting back to my school just before the curfew. So I didn't think about that again, like it was nice, thanks, like it was one of those things that sure, was a nice thing for you to do, but I never expect to see you again. So weeks go by, a couple weeks go by. I'm studying for my French exam, and the counselor calls me up to the front door of the girls' residence and says, oh, you have visitors. I'm thinking, visitors? I'm not expecting any visitors. But there was my friend with another friend of ours and 3 young men, that 2 of whom were the young men that they met at this dance. So they asked if I could go out, and they brought a permission slip from my parents, and so the counselor had no choice but to let me go out. So we went out and like, now what are we going to do, right? So they decided that they're going to go bowling. So we went bowling, but everybody was really awkward. And so finally, when I got some time with the girls alone in the washroom, I'm saying, like, what's up? How come everybody's so awkward, especially the young man that was, supposed to be paired with me? And they said, well, you're not going to like this very much. And I go, like, what do you mean you're not going to like this? Well, the young man whose name was Steve invited his cousin out for a blind date, but they didn't tell the poor guy that it really was a blind date. So when he drove up to the building that had the sign Ontario School for the Blind, this poor cousin was panicking. Well, they were like all upset, but I laughed so hard I cried, you know, because I just thought it was just totally amazing that somebody would do, one, something that unfair to his cousin, but two, something that, you know, that outrageous. So anyway, we got it out in the open and everything, you know, sort of settled down, and we went and had a milkshake and they dropped me off at school. And, you know, I thought, well, you know, like, what can I do? They did it. We had a laugh and that was it. And the time went on, and it's a couple more weeks later. And now we're home for the Christmas holidays. And we had just finished putting up our Christmas tree. And our family was sitting around watching TV. And then the doorbell rings. And there are my friends again with just one of my girlfriends and the young man that she had met at the dance. But it was only Steve, the one guy that introduced me to his blind cousin. And there he was with a dozen pink carnations. And I'm thinking, like, wow, what's going on here? And so we ended up, the long and the short of it is, we became friendly and we got together. And you know, God has an interesting sense of humor, because if you play a prank on someone, you never know when he's going to play a prank on you. Because 2 years later, it was Steve and his family that drove up to my home and picked me up for a wedding, and everybody on the street was out looking to see who was stupid enough to marry a blind girl. And we were married for 30 years, but that's another story. So that's one of my strange sort of urban Baptist stranger than fiction stories. Thank you.
Whoa, brilliantly told. Brilliantly
Oh,
told.
lovely.
Lovely
Well,
story.
Valentina is the captain of one of the England football teams. Back in the day, wanted to impress Lady Diana, who was then still married to the Prince of Wales. So he went to the flower shop and he ordered 21 roses. And he sent them off to her and he said, I'm sending you 21 roses because that's the number of the years that you've been on this planet. Right? Well, the number of the, no, how's it go? On the card it said, I'm sending you these roses for they are the number of the years that you've been on this planet. But the florist, because he was such a good customer, added 20 roses on top of it. So there was only 41, and Princess Diana at the time was only 32, and she never spoke to him again for 5 years. Okay.
Well, and you know, like it's just amazing. And you know, like and today, so people just go, oh, how terrible. But I'm sorry, it was so funny. Like, especially the poor cousin who had no clue this was coming. And I'm going like, it's okay, you know, life goes on, right? And I'm laughing, and all of them are going like, oh no, right? It was just too funny.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If I'd been there, I'd have fallen over laughing. That's my sense of humor all over. Right. So the other thing is that we have to ask, as if you got, right, I get into trouble for this because if I say it's a blind dog, they say the dog can see, it's me who's blind. So you have to say seeing eye dogs now. So have you got a seeing eye dog?
No, I don't. And I'll tell you why. Because I am self-centered enough that I would rather have people say good morning to me first than the dog. I remember going to, I used to go to work with my German Shepherd guide dog, and she was lovely. And she was a little flirt, right? She just loved everybody, especially men. And I'd be on the elevator and I'd say to the guys, hey guys, there's a woman at the other end of this dog. You could say something to me first.
That's
Well,
priceless.
I actually, Valentina, I do exactly the opposite because we've got a little black and white collie dog. Her name's Hattie and she's 3 years old. And I take her to the pub quite often because she loves going to the pub because she gets biscuits and everybody does exactly the same to her as they do to your guide dog. They come and talk to Hattie before they come to me. But if I go to the pub all by myself, I'm the little old man sat in the corner with a pint of beer. If I go to the pub with Hattie, all the blue-eyed, good-looking blondes who are about 18 come and talk to Hattie, then they come and talk to me afterwards. It works an absolute treat. They won't talk to me normally.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, so
yeah,
right.
no, it's just really important to have a good perspective on things like that, and you know, and just keep on going. So I hadn't told that story here yet, so I thought I would tell that story.
I
No,
love
it's
your
lovely. I'm
spirit.
pleased you did. I've got another one. I'll tell you another day, Valentina.
Yeah. So
Despina. We're going to go to Despina, and then Norman, are you telling stories tonight, or are you just listening, my friend?
I was prepared to give an Arabic tale, actually, because I thought I miscalculated. I thought I'd find you in Marrakesh this time.
2 weeks
Sunday.
time.
Yeah. I'll save it for then.
Yeah,
I'll save it
okay.
for then.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I could tell him Aesop's tale if you like.
Absolutely. I do like. Yes.
All right, great. Adult version of it, yeah?
Yeah.
All right, so before I begin, actually, Valentina, I know you've grown tired of listening to how inspirational you are, but it's true, you are. So here it comes once again. Plus, if you did not have that wicked sense of humor back then, you might have wasted your chance of becoming happy for the next 30 years. So well done. All right, so I was sitting next to the river and I was getting kind of bored. I didn't have anything particular to do on that day. And then right in front of my eyes passed that bird again. It was tall and it had these very, very thin legs that bent it backwards. And he was, yeah, you know, he was a stork. He was very weird to look at. And I didn't have anything better to do with my time. So well, I thought, you know, why don't I play a little prank? So as he was sitting on his one leg, the other one gathered behind, and he was contemplating the horizon. I went by his side and said, "Stork, how are you? You know, I've been seeing you around this place lately, and I thought, well, how would you like to come by my place tomorrow and have some dinner? You know, would you like that?" I already knew I was very good looking, but with my golden brown fur and all, and my bushy tail with a white top. Yeah, I was very, very elegant. He wouldn't possibly be able to tell me no, would he? And he didn't. Of course he didn't. I think he jumped at the opportunity. And he said, yes, thank you for the invitation. I will come and pay my respects tomorrow night. And I went back to my place and I prepared everything. And there you had it, 7 o'clock sharp. He couldn't have been more British than that. Knock on the door. I opened it up and he was so smart, looking very elegant in his suit. Well, he couldn't possibly hide the thin legs underneath, but yeah, you know, he had made an effort. So I took him inside. He gave me a bunch of flowers and a box of chocolate, which I thanked him for, and took it back to the kitchen, set him down at the table. And I could see he was hungry. I had prepared soup in the kitchen, and the lovely scent was reaching us there at the table where we sat chatting, chit-chatting until it was ready. And when I thought I had him hungry enough, I said, well, prepare yourself. Get your towel so you don't get dirty from the soup, and I'll just go and fetch our plates. So there I was inside, serving my guest first and myself then. And we had these nice, well, kind of shallow, to be honest, bowls of soup in front of us. And they were smelling so good. I mean, this soup, I had put all my magic technique in it to make it as tasty as possible. I know, Babasi, I could make it even a worse torture for you. I know how you get angry listening to stories. But what can I say? It was a very tasty soup. I could see his eyes glistening when he saw it. And I started slurping through my bowl and making sound of satisfaction while I was consuming my soup. And then the poor fellow, poor him, he tried catching something with his long, long beak through the shallow bowl I had served the soup in. Yeah. I was suppressing the laughter, of course, but I think he could see it in my eyes. But anyway, I held cool and just made a sharp comment like, you know, it is lovely, isn't it? Yeah, I think it's the best soup I've made in a while. Don't you agree? You know, stuff like that. And of course, he was very kind. He was very polite. He said, yes, yes, the soup is wonderful. And then he had not been able to have a single zip out of it. So the night was over and I bid him farewell and I said goodnight. And just before he left, he said, why don't you come over my place tomorrow so I can repay the favor? Well, I thought, look at this. I mean, I knew that this thought was kind of silly, you know, not the brightest tool in the box, but I wouldn't expect to gain something out of it other than entertainment. So, of course, I said, yes, sure, I will come to your house. And the next day, I didn't go hunting because I knew something good was going to be waiting for me at dinner time. So I just let the day pass and ignored my hunger, which getting bigger by the minute. And at 7 o'clock sharp, I was knocking at his door. I had put my loveliest dress. It was red and it looked wonderful on me. I knew I would amaze him. So he opened up the door and I gave him the bottle of wine I had taken as a gift for dinner and sat at the table. He was very polite. Again, he sat with me and we chit-chatted and I could smell the scent coming out of his kitchen. Now, I don't know exactly. I think it must have been fish and I love fish. I couldn't wait for it. I did take part in the conversation, but just out of kindness, you know. In fact, I was only there for the food, of course. And he said that dinner was ready and disappeared into the kitchen for a couple of minutes. And when he came back, he served me this glass kind of plate I had never seen the like of. It was like a bowl on the bottom, and then it came up in a column like a vase for flowers. But I could see him put his beak inside the whole thing to the bottom of the vase and pick up fish, and I held it with my front paws and I tried licking it. I did. I put my snout in there as deep as I could, but I couldn't reach out my tongue deep enough to have a zip. And my stomach was grumbling, and he'd say things like, this is a lovely dinner, isn't it? And then, of course, I'd have to pay him a compliment for his cooking. And I thanked him for dinner and went home on an empty stomach. And I couldn't believe this thing had happened to me. Had I been outwitted? Nobody should know about this. And you listening to me now, you will take this with you to the grave. Ευχαριστώ.
That Aesop was very clever, wasn't he?
Indeed.
He was very, very clever. All those years ago, wasn't he clever? Right. We have an old saying here. We have a saying, old wives' tales. Well, these old wives knew a bit. You know, that's why they've got it to be an old wives' tale. Right. Norman, are you doing something tonight, or are you just listening, my old friend?
Well, I did say I'm listening, but there is a story I could tell. It's one for this time of the year. It's from the Ottawa Valley. Are you asking me right now to, or do you in the line? Yeah, I changed my mind. I did say what I did, but it's called Jack and the Old Woman of the Woods. So tell it now. Okay. Well, you know, as you know, I'm from the Ottawa Valley. I left there many, many years ago, but I never, as they say, you can leave the valley, but the valley doesn't leave you. And while I didn't have any stories from the valley, they came to me while I was living outside in Toronto. And so this is the story of Jack and the Old Woman of the Woods. Now, and maybe it's a bit of a story about this time of the year too, because you see, Jack lived all alone with his mother on a farm on Black Bay Road up in the Ottawa Valley. They lived alone because Jack's father had been lost in the Great War, and his story was unfortunately a common one. Now, there's lots of work to be done on a farm, especially if there's only one woman and one lad, and a lad who, well, Jack meant to do all the work, but you know what? When he went out to the barn with a pitchfork, he took one look at what was piled up behind the cows, and he would try to haul some water, but it was heavy and slopped, and he got his legs wet, and so he ended up just dropping everything, going into the forest to pick berries, where the air was sweet, the birds were singing, and his mother ended up doing all the work, all of it. But Jack meant well. Now, this morning of this day, of this story, was no different from all the other days. Jack got up, his mother banged on the stairwell. "Wake up, Jack! Daylight in the swamp, time to get up." And Jack would stretch and yawn and slowly come down the stairway. And by the time he reached the kitchen, his breakfast was waiting for him, toast and porridge and a big mug of steaming tea. And he would eat, and he was drinking, and when he'd finished his breakfast, he went out, and, well, the wood was kind of hard and heavy to carry, and he brought in one armload, and that was it. And then he brought in water, well, just a little bit, so that his mother would have something to drink and to make the tea. And as I said, when he went out to the barn with a pitchfork, he took one smell and hightailed it into the woods, and with the berry pail. And it was a good time for berries at that time of the year, blueberries. And so he was picking the blueberries one by one, listening to the birds sing. Now, Jack thought he knew every single bird in the woods, but suddenly he heard, seeming to come from an old dead pine tree, the sound of a bird he'd never heard before. A strange trilling sound with a low note at the far end of it. He'd never heard that before. And he put down his pail of berries, and he went over to that tree and he walked around the tree, but he didn't see any bird and then suddenly it sounded again. Long trill with a low note at the end of it, deeper in the woods. And Jack, he just had to find out what that bird was. And so he followed the sound into the woods. Well, to make a long story short, Jack followed that bird's deeper and deeper and deeper into the woods until suddenly he realized he was lost. And he thought he'd never ever get lost in his own woods, but there he was, lost. And what's more, kaboom! Crack of thunder, flash of lightning, and from the clouds above came a torrent of cold, wet rain, and Jack was soaked to the skin in no time. And what's worse, it was getting dark. Jack had been out so long, the sun had gone down. And there was poor Jack wandering through the trees, banging off the trees and tripping over the branches and the stumps. He didn't hear the bird, he didn't hear anything except the sound of his own feet squelching through the trees. And he was cold and he was wet and he was miserable. And more than anything else, he wanted to find a place that was warm and dry. When suddenly he saw a light off in the darkness. And where there's light, there's people. And where there's people, there's fire. And he stumbled through the darkness and he came to a small clearing. And in a small clearing, there was a small cabin with a light coming from that window. So he ran over to the door. But before he could knock on the door opened all by itself, silently. And there in the light of a fireplace, he could see on one side, he could see a big bed with a quilt covering it. And on the other side of the fireplace, there was a little old lady sitting in a rocking chair. They're just sitting there rocking back and forth, back and forth. Then she stopped and she looked over at Jack and says, "Hey, Jack! Boy, you're looking terrible. You must be cold, wet, and miserable. Come on in." Now, Jack didn't know how she knew his name, but, well, they're always named Jack, aren't they? So Jack didn't need to be asked twice. He jumped across the threshold, he ran over to the fireplace, and he was standing there dripping and steaming and turning around and dripping and steaming. Meanwhile, the old woman was sitting in her rocking chair, just rocking back and forth, and then she stopped. "Hey," she said, "Jack, that shirt looks awful wet and must make you very uncomfortable. Why don't you take it off?" And Jack thought that was a good idea. And so he unbuttoned his flannel shirt, and the old woman came over and took it from him, and she shook it out, folded it up, smoothed out the wrinkles, and put it in the middle of the room. And meanwhile, Jack stood there by the fire, warming himself, while the woman went back to the rocking chair to rock back and forth, and then she stopped. "Hey, Jack, why don't you take off those wet boots too? You must have rubbed your feet raw." That seemed like a good idea too. So Jack unlaced his boots, took them off. The old woman came over. She took the boots and put them on top of the shirt in the middle of the room and went back to rocking chair to rock back and forth, and then she stopped. She said, Jack, why don't you take off those wet jeans of yours? I can dry them for you." And Jack, well, he was in his long underwear, so he didn't mind taking off his wet jeans. And the old woman took the jeans, she shook them out, smoothed out the wrinkles, folded up the jeans and put it on a pile in the middle of the room. And she went back to her rocking chair to sit down and to rock back and forth, back and forth. And then she stopped. She looked at Jack and she said, "Hey, Jack, why don't you?" Jack ran over to the bed, jumped underneath the quilt, took off the long underwear and flung them across the room. and they went flying like a big bird, and she caught them. And she shook out the long underwear. She smoothed out the wrinkles. She folded them up and put them in the middle of the room. And then she went back to rocking chair to rock back and forth, back and forth, and she stopped. Then she said, Jack, 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 give me your skin. And Jack's skin slid off of him like silk, and there it lay on the floor. And she came over and she bent down, she picked up Jack's skin, she shook it out, smoothed out the wrinkles, folded it up, and put it in the top of the pile in the middle of the room. She went back to rocking chair to rock back and forth, back and forth. And then she stopped and she said, Jack, Jack Tingle, give me your flesh. And Jack took his flesh off his bones. Slap, 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 slap. The old woman came over, she took his flesh and folded it up as best as she could, smoothed it out, put it on top of the pile in the middle of the room. Then she stopped. She went back to rocking chair to rock back and forth, and then she stopped one more time. She said, Jack, Jack, give me your bones. She looked at Jack, and Jack could see the fire glittering red in her eyes. And so he took his bones, click, 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 click. The old woman came over and took the bones, bundled them up, and put them on top of the pile. And the very last thing that she put on top was Jack's skull facing the fire. And then she went back to a rocking chair to rock back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth until she fell asleep. And so Jack went to sleep too, what there was of him. And in the morning, Jack woke up. The sun was coming through the one window, and the sky was blue and clear outside. Jack saw that the old woman was still asleep. She wasn't rocking back and forth, so he got out of bed and he went across the room very quietly. And I can't tell you how quiet he was. He took the bones and he put them into place. Click, 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 clickety, click, click, and the skull clicked. The old woman was still asleep. And he took his flesh and he put it back into place. Slap, 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 slappity, slap. The old woman was still sleeping. So he put on his skin, and it fitted him well, like a skin. And then he put on his long underwear, which was dry, and his jeans, and his boot, and his shirt, and he picked up his boots, and he tiptoed across the room. He put on one boot. The woman was still asleep. He put on the other boot. The old woman was still asleep. And then he ran like hell. He ran and he ran and he ran until he had run out of breath. And when he had stopped, he knew where he was. He was on the laneway that led up to his own farm. He ran up the laneway to the barn. He grabbed hold of the pitchfork and he cleaned out those stables until they were as clean as a whistle. And then he took enough water and he almost drowned those poor cows, filling their water trough. And then he went into the woodshed and he lifted up a huge armload of wood, and he went staggering into the porch and then into the kitchen and dumped all that wood into the wood box by the stove. He turned around and there was his mother, laying down breakfast like she always did. Tea and toast and porridge. And Jack, he was hungrier than he'd ever been in his entire life. And so while he was eating and drinking, his mother just walked away and Gwen picked up some knitting that she'd been doing, and she went to her rocking chair that was always by the kitchen stove, and she sat her in a rocking chair to rock back and forth. She looked at Jack and she smiled. And from that day on, if Jack wasn't the hardest working lad in the Ottawa Valley, he certainly was the hardest working lad on Black Bay Road. And every word of that story is as true as the next.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Norman, for finishing it off tonight. I'm going to hand it back to John, who's got some parish notices he's going to say.
I'm going to say that. And Mike, as I've managed to get back, can I do a short poem?
Oh, of course you can. Yes, of course you can.
Well,
Yeah.
it's kind of a real story, but I wrote it as a poem. And there's for those across the water, any water, whether it's the Channel or the Atlantic. There's a few place names, and they're all underground stations in London: Moorgate, Ladbroke Grove, Edgware Road, and Paddington. So they're just placed in London. And this is it's called Easy. If you think this is easy, put on a blindfold, get a cane, and you try it. This is one of those reality mornings, blood on the pavement at 5 a.m. with the drunk and homeless shuffling through the dawn streets while I take long strides towards the first train south. My seat is reserved, and by the 98th page of my paperback, I'm in the city and riding the underground. The discomfort of inaction blunders into the carriage at Moorgate. His voice, as a voice assures the lost bulk, all he has to do is step off the train and he will be met at Edgware Road. His cane is on my blind side, and he is halfway down the carriage and staggering before I'm even partially in the picture. Surrounded by the sighted seated, he reaches for a pole. The error of his aim is minimal as his fingers close on thin air. The style sisters laugh while most of us stare into that space where nothing is seen. The inaction is unbearable. As I feel myself standing, simultaneously, a young black hand takes the blind man's elbow and guides him to a seat. I wanted to thank him on behalf of the whole carriage's embarrassment. The blind man talks football with anyone who will listen until one stop from Edgware Road, the train all but empties. There is panic as he asks if anyone is still there. I'm already next to him, absolving my sins, talking writing and destinations. At Edgware Road, there is no one to meet him, and I pass him on to the next stranger. There is a complication on the line involving closures and buses, and I see him put back on the train for one more stop. I swap carriages, picking up the conversation on the assumption my voice is as recognizable as my face. I'm wrong. We discuss the approaches of faceless multitudes and his journey. He's come from Woolwich and is visiting the fire station at Ladbroke Grove. He does this every Saturday and is wearing a fire brigade jacket. At Paddington, I ask a railway employee in a high-vis jacket and a peak cap to escort him to the bus before reading the menu at the coffee stall and peering at the departures board. And I remember his words: if you think this is easy, put on a blindfold, get a cane, and you try it.
That is, I'm sorry. I have actually had trips like that. It's very good. Thank you.
Oh, and parish notices. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Right. So while you're working it out, John, on the 14th of November in the Pottery in Much Wenlock, we've got our live club again. So we're calling it Words at the Edge. So it's not just stories, it's poems and things. It's on a Monday evening from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock. And I know that I'm looking at people who are many thousands of miles away, but that's what we're going to do. One in November and we've got one in December. And it's a quintessentially English club with a log burning fire and pints of ale and all that kind of thing. So that's what we're doing here in Shropshire. So John, over to you.
Right. Well, Tuesday, as always, at 5 o'clock in the evening, we have our young international tellers. And if anyone has any young tellers that they know, it's a totally open mic for them. They can come on and tell a story in any language they like. And then on Friday, it's been great. We've had last week we had Punjab, Nigeria, and where else was it? Somewhere else. I've forgotten. Who was it? I don't know. Sometimes we have Gaza on, children from Gaza, and it's amazing. And of course, I know where it was. It was that little place in Morocco, Marrakesh. We had some young tellers in the actual cafe, World Storytelling Cafe in Marrakesh, where Mike and I will be for the next program of this, and I will Monday week. So on Friday, we have on Friday 11th with Michael Kerins, who's a great mate of Donald's, and
and a great tailor.
I keep hearing amazing things about him from people all over the world. How come I don't know him yet? And then we got nothing on the Sunday. It's a Sunday straight, and then it's Tuesday again. And on Friday on the Friday 18th we've got Dawn Ellis, and then on Sunday the 20th from Marrakesh, live and direct from the World Storytelling Cafe, we have Mike Rust, who will be sitting next to me, and Waleed and Kamal for the worldwide story round. See you all back then, or any of our other programs. But meanwhile, thank you, Mike, for hosting everything.
Can I ask, excuse me, I want to interrupt you. I'm sorry I'm being rude, but
no, you're never rude.
I did want to tell you people that you know how everything is going back to in person, and some of us in Canada have decided that we do want to keep a Zoom presence in storytelling. So today, starting at, I guess it's 9 o'clock your time, we are having something called Story Swap Canada. And I don't have the link, but it's on Storytellers of Canada website. And it's going to happen every Sunday. So on a Sunday when, if you want to still
well,
do
I'll tell you what,
storytelling.
Valentina, and I can't speak for anybody else, but I think some of them will pick me up on this. I will happily come one Sunday and tell a few stories for you.
Yeah, so
as a guest.
that would be great. So I can send you the link.
That's in about 20 minutes time then.
Yes. Yeah. So
but not tonight. But not tonight. But if you want to get
it's going to be every Sunday though. I just thought if somebody wanted a Sunday evening, I know it's late for you guys, but if that would be nice. Like if I send you a link, maybe you could come.
Oh yeah, we'd love a link.
Absolutely, we'd love to come in and we'll sort out some.
We'd love to link up.
And
absolutely.
We'll put it in.
Valentina, there's us, and I'm sure we know some really famous and good storytellers from somewhere who's not here.
Valentina,
yes.
Valentina, if you the World Storytelling Cafe community page on Facebook.
Okay.
If you put the link in there, if you put it up on there with the link,
okay,
then we'll see it.
And we'll see it. Okay. All right. We'd love to do that. The reason we're keeping this going is as the COVID pandemic hopefully fades away and is not as intrusive as it was, we found that a lot of people who couldn't travel with disabled, the people I'm looking at now are from all over the world. The Zoom isn't quite as good, in my personal opinion, as a live sitting around a fire or whatever it else, but it has its uses and it works very well.
But
and John and I are determined.
It's a different medium.
Well, it's certainly, it is. And you know what? You guys have really, just knowing you, the bit that I do, because obviously, it's over the Ethernet, and it's not the same. However, when
you don't want to know Donald in reality.
Oh yes, I do. But you know what I'm saying? It's just wonderful to know that you're around, and it's been really lovely to get to know this community. I'm so grateful that you're still doing it, and I'll be around. So, but I just
Well,
thought I'd let you guys know.
I second that. I mean, where else can I mean this platform allows us to meet people from all around the world.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
we have you, we have Donald, we have Norman and Valentina in Canada. We have some guy called Baba C in Washington, D.C. in the United States of America. We have people all over the place. We have Lucy in London. By the way, Lucy, in the state of Virginia, we have a city called London. And that's why sometimes you guys confuse me, because I'm like, are they talking about the States? They're talking about the UK. But anyhow, this platform, whether we go back to full-time interactions or not, you cannot, it is impossible, it is physically impossible to get all of us in the same place at the same time in what they call the non-virtual reality. So I hope that projects like this and like what Valentina is sharing continue, because this is
Absolutely.
this is better than stone soup.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then Keith and I, we met up at Whitby this year. So there is an opportunity where we can't all be together in one place. Norman was in Much Wenlock. We can't all be in one place, but over the year, maybe I'll get to meet one of you or two of you. I'll meet John next week. We've met before in person. And I hope very much one day that Despina will be here in Much Wenlock with the new commission and stuff like that. I know you've been talking about it, Anyway, so we're going to call it tonight.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much for being here. I'll
Thank
see you in
you.
a fortnight's time, but I won't see you here. I'll see you on the screen, but I'm going to be in Marrakesh with John physically. And we're going to be there, and we're doing it because we've done this. Because John and I and the World Storytelling Cafe and my festival and everything else, we've done this for nearly 2.5 years now, John, every other Sunday.
Wow.
Whoa.
Wow.
And the people who have been doing it, I haven't had a chance to say thank you to Waleed and to Kamel and people like that. So that's why I'm going. So anyway, so thank you
Wonderful.
for being here to do this, because I couldn't do it without you.
Just so
Thank
you
you,
know,
Mike.
as
Thank
long
you.
as you keep doing it, you'll have us here like an octopus on your face, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. One day we'll all train our faces.
Take
Thank you,
care,
Ali, for
everyone.
flying the
Thank
magic
you,
carpet.
Waleed.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Until the next time, to be continued.
Okay. Well.
Later, Lucy. All right, I guess it's time for me to say it. I really need a new tagline. See
Bye-bye.
out. Oh, there you are. I hope you enjoyed today.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you very much.
Very good. Please don't be a stranger. You're always welcome. You don't have to tell a tale, but if you do want to tell a tale, the tale will be told well, and we'll listen. So, please visit, whether you're telling or listening or doing both. You're always welcome here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right. Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Until the next time. Waleed, here come my magic words. See out.